Hi everybody. I'd just like to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about research and the research process. I know that many of us, myself included, growing up, were taught that pretty much grades were all that mattered, and the goal of being a good student was to get a good grade, an A or a B, and then that meant that I was a good student, I was succeeding in high school or elementary school or middle school. I would be able to go to college if I got A's and B's, and that was the whole goal, to go to college. And then when I got to college, you know, you're in these classes and you approach them as, okay, what do I need to do in order to get this assignment completed? What do I need to do in order to get this grade? Now, if you don't approach school that way, then kudos to you. If you love learning in all contexts, then you are well far beyond where I was in college, and where a majority of people are. But for those of you who are like me, I just want to comment a little bit about the research process. So oftentimes what happens is, in the research process, is that students will formulate a question that they want to examine, or maybe they're forced to examine a question that they're not really interested in, but they have to anyway, and they're not really interested, they're not motivated, so the whole goal becomes getting the grade, getting it completed as quickly as possible with as little effort. And it's something that all humans do. I'm not like maybe I'm making a little bit of an ethical judgment about it, but I'm also including myself there. But the problem with that is, well, there are multiple problems with that perspective. But what ends up happening is that the student will formulate a thesis and then go and try to find online sources that confirm his or her thesis. And usually students will grab just individual quotes from entire journal articles or books that are, let's say, 300 pages long. And they'll find like one little quote that totally pull it out of context, align it with their perspective, with the argument they're trying to make, and then put the citation in, and then they're, okay, one of my citations is done, I have to use 7 other resources, so let me find another quote. Sometimes they'll even just use quotes from the abstract of an article or the introduction, and so you know that all they've done is read the introduction probably, or if it's from the abstract, then it's pretty evident. Like, any person who really does a good job of researching, any student, would know that it's probably not smart to just quote the abstract. Unless they're really smart and they get away with it a lot, with faculty who don't evaluate whether or not they're just grabbing those individual quotes. All right, so that's the way it typically goes. Then the student will reach their 7 or 8 resources or whatever they need for the assignment. They'll use these individual quotes. They'll cite everything properly. They'll have a good structure or whatever. You know, it'll be better than a majority of their classmates, let's say, and then they'll end up getting a B, and they're okay with that because they didn't really care about the assignment anyway. They didn't really care about the class. They just want to move on because they want to study, for me, philosophy. They want to study, for perhaps you, biology, criminal justice, psychology, business, whatever it is they want to study. What I would say is, the point of this video is just to present a different perspective. I would just encourage everybody to think of research as ongoing, forever. Research is not grabbing individual quotes that support our positions. Research is immersing yourself in the literature, in the conversations that are going on, and in the contemporary and historical dialogue within the field. Now, most classes these days are between 5 and 15 weeks at most universities, so that doesn't really give us a lot of time to jump in. Let's say you're taking 4 classes and you have 8-week quarters, you know, or 5 classes or 6 classes. You're not going to have a lot of time. You're not going to be able to spend 4 hours a night reading the most important works within that field. But what you can do is you can do maybe 1 hour for every course every night. And so as you approach it, rather than just finding articles and reading specific passages and pulling out things, I would just recommend that you read things that you find meaningful, that are academic, so academically published journal articles from peer-reviewed journals, academically published books, over just searching the internet. Now, some people hate Wikipedia, some people like it. I'm kind of in the middle ground. I think using contemporary periodicals like newspapers and things is fine. It's a fine place to start. Wikipedia is often great for certain things, but it's a great place to start. But you shouldn't use those as the end-all be-all articles in your papers. Instead, you should use those more popular articles to then springboard into the journal articles. And oftentimes those popular articles and Wikipedia will reference important journal articles in the field. There are other professional and academic websites. In philosophy, some good websites are the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Again, you could debate whether or not you should use that as a resource, but it's solid. I know that the NOAA website for climate and everything environment is a highly respected site. The job index from the government is a good place, if you're analyzing jobs and outcomes for people. But the important thing is that you start with the popular sources and then you move into the more academic. I think we've all heard different arguments that just basically come from cable news that are very simplistic arguments. They're not backed with any evidence. It's just kind of people spouting out sound bites, and then you hear people just kind of using those arguments. But there are important things that people have done tons of research on. For example, with the question of immigration. How many times have you made a claim or I've made a claim about immigration, its positive or negative aspects? But how many people have actually read articles? Because there are people who research immigration, and they research economic impact, both beneficial and negative. And those are published articles that are out there. They examine the crime rates within immigrant populations. Those articles are out there, and instead what we settle for is somebody on a cable news network just saying like, oh yeah, well, immigrants are more likely to be criminals than natural-born citizens. Well, neither you nor I have read articles, or maybe some of you have, academically published journal articles. I'm not talking about random blogs from the internet written by somebody's uncle who's huffing paint in a garage somewhere. I'm talking about people who have PhDs, people who dedicate their research to this, people who ascribe to some form of scientific method or humanistic method, like humanities studies methods, where you're doing reviews of literature, whether or not you utilize a scientific method. We need to read those things rather than blogs and Facebook posts and all of these other things. But it's just easier to access blogs and Facebook posts. So the whole point here is just to recommend to you to use popular resources, try to think of them objectively, but then use that as a springboard into academically published journal articles and academically published books. And then just read. And instead of trying to find something that supports our own position, what we need to do is read those articles to determine a position. Now, sometimes we might actually argue for a position that we don't even believe in, and that's often a good activity to do because it allows you to learn about other positions. But many times we're like, oh, well, I believe this, thus my outcome is that, thus I need to go find everything that supports my position. Really, research should be more about like, this is an interesting question to me. Like, I don't understand the economic impacts of immigration, really. I've heard what they say on the news, I've heard what my uncle, again, has said on his Facebook posts, but I haven't really read anything about it. So this is a question that interests me. So we go in, we try to remove our own preconceived ideas about whether or not it's good or bad, whatever that means, or positive or negative. And then we just start reading. And then we can learn things through our reading. Let's say we read an article that indicates that, from a high-level journal, that indicates that the crime rate actually for undocumented immigrants is lower than the general populace. And let's say that they say it's 15% lower. And then we read another article that says it's lower, but actually it's more like 8%. And then we read another article that says it's lower in certain ways, but higher in other ways. Well, we can start to formulate our thesis and our opinion and our belief, not just an opinion, but a belief about the topic based on all of the things that we've read, rather than just saying, I believe this, I have to entrench, I have to defend my beliefs at all costs. Because whatever side we're on issues, and really there's usually 14 or 15 sides to every issue, but whatever our perspective and our belief is on it, there's always more that we can learn. And if we just sit there and try to defend a position, then we're not really open to the totality of the research. So the other thing about research is that it's ongoing, it's forever. Our educational system tends to say, your research project is due 12 weeks after we start today, and your project's going to be on this, or you're going to tell me what your project's on. And then when you're done, get rid of it, right? Throw it away. How many times have you completed a paper? How many saved papers do you have on your computer right now that you've never revisited? You've never read any more articles about it. You've never learned anything more about it. It was just kind of an activity, just a certain activity and a certain form of mental and physical disposition. I don't know how really to say it. It had no impact on your learning. You couldn't tell me, you couldn't have a 5-minute conversation with me about what you even wrote in the paper. Now, I have those papers too. I'm not saying you, I'm saying we. But I would just encourage all of you to continue to research things that you enjoy. So if you like philosophy and you're taking an economics class, try to do your research in the realm of the philosophy of economics. If you like criminal justice and you're taking a history class, examine, Michel Foucault, right? Discipline and Punish. Examine the history of the penal system within the United States. You might find very interesting things. Or examine the history of a specific group that and its relation to the penal system, or to law, or to the way that they've been disciplined by the law over the history of the United States. Or perhaps you're more interested in Europe, or perhaps you're interested in Asia. Whatever you're interested in, always try to make your topics align with that. And then think of the interconnections between the classes that you're taking. So don't let your research just come to an end. Instead, if you really get interested, read more about it, get more books about it, talk to your professors about what they would recommend in the realm of the experts, the experts that you engage with. Because if you're just doing these singular activities that are then lost to history, that are lost out of your mind, essentially you're just paying tons of money in college for a degree, which is what a lot of people do. But at some point in your life, you're going to have to show the output of that degree. You're going to have to demonstrate your knowledge. And I can tell you what, most of us will not remember, 95% of what we learned in college in terms of subject matter. But what does come across a lot with people is curiosity. It's their interest, their wonder. It's their ability in a work context or in a relational context to go out, to find high quality information, to maintain objectivity, to not entrench, to be open to other perspectives, to say, hey, we've gone this far and things are really bad, so let's backtrack a little bit. Have you ever been with anybody who, or around anyone who, they're like, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to just press on forever. And then, I call it like the horror movie fallacy, where it's like, oh, here's like a cabin in the woods. Let's go down in the basement. And then like one person gets killed and they're like, well, Jimmy, we got to keep going because we've come this far. And then the next person gets their head chopped off or whatever. And then, well, we've lost 2 people, but come on, Tina, we got to, it's the sign of a good thinker. It's the sign of a good researcher to be able to figure out when you've hit a roadblock or when, you're facing Freddy Krueger, and to backtrack, to move to another position. And that's something that we should all do. And it's something that's becoming less and less and less a method of living in our society. Now, I don't want to overgeneralize or anything, but in such a polarizing environment, you see people just entrenching. If they get attacked, they go even further, even deeper, and they refuse to, analyze other sources. They think of research as something that's done by Googling on the internet, or Binging, whatever you like to use. But anyway, research. Use high levels of evidence. Don't settle for newspapers, magazines, Uncle Tim's racist blog or whatever. Academic published journal articles, peer-reviewed, academically published books, high-level news sources. Often news magazines present much more in-depth stories than things like newspapers. And I'm not blaming newspapers, they just have limited time to get stories out so that they can be on the cutting edge. And then also they have limited space. But utilize those resources. Don't let your research end when it's over. Instead, keep analyzing the questions and the topics that you find interesting, and don't reuse illicitly or illegally the written work that you've used before, but use that written work to draw connections to your current work, and perhaps you do reference yourself in the future. So anyway, think of it that way. Think of research as never ending, and then just continue to keep working and don't settle for poor resources.